They thought they were intimidating a defenseless old man on a quiet bus. What they didn't realize was that he was an ex-CIA operative, ready to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind where the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the streets of Chicago. The bus was packed, its usual mix of office workers, students, and retirees heading home after a long day. Among them sat an elderly black man, his demeanor calm, his presence unassuming. His hands rested lightly on a well-worn cane, and his eyes gazed out the window, lost in thought. Across the aisle, a group of teenagers clambered aboard, their laughter loud and brash. They moved to the back, their energy filling the space with a chaotic buzz. One of them, a tall boy wearing a bright red hoodie, spotted the old man and nudged his friends. "Look at Grandpa over there," he said with a smirk, his voice carrying over the murmur of the bus. The man didn't react, his gaze fixed on the passing streets. This seemed to embolden the boy. "Hey, old man," he called out, his tone mocking. "What's with the cane? You got a sword hidden in there or something?" Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the teenagers and the elderly man. Most chose to stay silent, unwilling to get involved. The old man turned slightly, his expression serene, but he said nothing. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" The boy pressed, his friends chuckling. He stood up, swaying with the motion of the bus, and took a few steps closer. "Come on, say something. You afraid of us?" The man's hands tightened ever so slightly around his cane, his calm demeanor unwavering. Finally he spoke, his voice low but firm. "Respect is something you give, not something you demand." The boy froze for a moment, caught off guard by the man's tone. His bravado faltered, but he quickly covered it with a laugh. "Respect? What do you know about respect? You're just an old man." The tension on the bus was palpable. Passengers glanced at one another, silently questioning whether they should intervene. The man's gaze met the boy's, steady and unyielding. "You think strength is in how loud you are," he said, "but real strength is quiet, controlled, earned." The boy's friends shuffled nervously, their laughter fading. One of them muttered, "Maybe we should sit down." But the boy in the red hoodie wasn't ready to back down. His pride was on the line. "Oh yeah? You gonna show me what strength looks like, old man?" The bus jolted to a stop, and the old man rose slowly from his seat. He wasn't tall, and years had worn down his once muscular frame, but there was something about the way he stood, a quiet confidence that demanded attention. "You want to see strength?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Let me tell you a story." The bus fell silent, the other passengers now fully invested in the unfolding scene. The man's voice carried a weight that seemed to command respect. "Years ago, I was in a place far from here, doing things you can't even imagine. I was younger than you, cocky, thinking I knew everything. Then I learned the hard way that real strength isn't about muscles or words. It's about surviving when the odds are against you. It's about protecting the people who can't protect themselves." The boy in the hoodie crossed his arms, trying to appear unfazed, but the man's words seemed to chip away at his bravado. "What are you, some kind of war hero?" he asked, his tone less mocking now. The man's lips curved into a faint smile. "Something like that," he said. "But what I am now is a man who's lived long enough to know the difference between courage and foolishness. And right now, you're being foolish." The boy's face flushed, his confidence slipping. He glanced at his friends, but they avoided his gaze. One of them muttered, "Let it go, man." The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes briefly meeting the old man's. He gave a slight nod as if to say he had the situation under control. The old man turned back to the boy. "You have a choice right now. You can sit down and learn from this, or you can keep pushing and find out the hard way what happens when you cross the wrong person." For a moment it seemed like the boy might argue, but then he dropped his gaze and muttered, "Whatever," before slinking back to his seat. His friends followed, their earlier bravado replaced by uneasy silence. The old man returned to his seat, his movements deliberate and measured. The tension on the bus began to ease, though the weight of the moment lingered. A young woman across the aisle leaned forward. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice tinged with admiration. The man nodded but said nothing, his gaze once again focused on the window. The bus continued on its route, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Passengers exchanged glances, some smiling, others deep in thought. They had witnessed something rare that day, a lesson in dignity and strength that spoke louder than any words. As the bus approached his stop, the man rose and made his way to the door. Before stepping off, he turned to face the passengers. "Kindness and respect cost nothing," he said, his voice carrying over the hum of the bus. "But they're worth everything." With that, he stepped onto the street and disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a bus full of people who would never forget the quiet strength of the man with the cane. But the story didn't end there. As the bus moved on, the boy in the red hoodie sat in sullen silence, his bravado fully deflated. One of his friends, a girl with curly hair and a nervous smile, finally spoke up. "You know, he wasn't just some old guy. Did you see the way he moved? Like he was trained or something." The boy scoffed, but there was an edge of doubt in his voice. "Yeah, right. He's just some old dude with a cane." The girl shook her head. "No, seriously. My grandpa's a retired Marine, and he moves like that. Controlled. Like he knows exactly what he's doing." The boy didn't respond, but his mind was racing. He thought back to the way the man had stood, the calmness in his eyes, the quiet authority in his voice. It wasn't the demeanor of someone who was afraid. It was the demeanor of someone who had nothing to prove because they had already faced far worse. Later that evening, the boy couldn't shake the encounter. He found himself scrolling through his phone, searching for stories about retired veterans or ex-CIA agents living in Chicago. He read about men and women who had served their country in silence, their acts of heroism known only to a select few. And for the first time, he wondered if the man on the bus had been one of them. Meanwhile, the old man returned to his modest apartment, his cane resting by the door. He poured himself a cup of tea and sat by the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. He thought about the boy, about the fire in his eyes that reminded him of his own younger self. He hoped the boy would take the lesson to heart, that he would grow into the kind of man who understood the value of respect and kindness. The next morning, as the man walked to the corner store, he passed by a group of teenagers hanging out by a graffiti-covered wall. One of them looked familiar, the boy in the red hoodie. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, to the old man's surprise, the boy nodded. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. The man nodded back, a faint smile playing on his lips. Perhaps, he thought, the boy was starting to understand. Perhaps the lesson had taken root. And as he continued on his way, the old man felt a glimmer of hope, not just for the boy, but for everyone who had been on that bus. Because sometimes all it takes is one moment, one encounter to change the course of a life. Thank you for watching this extended story. If you enjoyed it and want to see more powerful tales like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and remember, the quietest voices often have the loudest lessons.